Hey guys, I'm Rachel O'Leary, and to follow the theme of previous videos, today I need to confess my great love for Phalaenopsis orchids. Now I realize this is a pretty modest collection in comparison to a lot of those people out there who have orchids, but I've really been enjoying keeping them, so I wanted to share with you guys how I do it. Now I think it's important to say first and foremost that I am not an expert. I am not a trained professional even, but I am an enthusiast, and I figured out sort of what works for me with my water, my orchids in my area. So let's get started. Now for me, with any of my hobbies, I find the most useful way to know how to keep or grow things is to do just a little bit of digging about how they occur in the wild, where they're found in the wild, what sort of soil composition, environment, and temperature range that they'll encounter, because it can give us a lot of really valuable clues in order to have better success with our plants as well as our aquariums. So Phalaenopsis orchids, or the moth orchid, I guess I can understand that common name. To me, it looks more like they're screaming than a moth. It's part of the reason I love them so much. It looks like they're going, ah! Anyway, they come from all over Southeast Asia, and there is an incredible diversity both of wild orchids as well as those that have been cultured for the plant trade. And they generally have, roughly 60 degrees overnight and, mid 80s up to about 95 during the day. So basically wherever we're relatively comfortable, they're relatively comfortable, which is one of the reasons they make such exceptional houseplants. Now, in the wild, they do not grow in any soil. They're epiphytes, which means that they grow into the bark of trees, into the nooks and crannies of branches, and they develop these long, sort of fibrous roots that give them purchase. And this is a great clue for us as orchid keepers, because it means that those roots need good air circulation. And it also means that they don't need to be in a nutritionally complete style soil or container. And there's lots and lots and lots of types of potting medias people like to use. There's plenty of commercially available orchid mixes that work out really well for a lot of people. I have had the best luck in my home using one particular medium, which we'll talk about here shortly. Now, it's important to remember, I am giving you my experience. Again, not an expert, not a trained professional, just a nerd in my house. And there's plenty of variables that go into why your houseplants do or don't do well. The humidity of your home, what your source water is like. Does it have a high mineral content? Does it have a low mineral content? So just like with anything else, there's a lot of variables to understand, and you'll find that no cookie cutter way that's written or discussed really applies to every single person, keeper, grower, etc. I like to say that plants, fish, and animals don't read the books, so arming yourself with the best information possible is the best way to have success. So anyway, I find that my orchids do best when I keep them in an east-facing window. Now, my house has a lot of unique obstacles. It is fully windows on one whole side. Unfortunately, it's not the best side for growing plants. I do have this one window in my home that is east facing, and it took me a few years to really figure out that that was the best window for my orchids. I had previously just been keeping my African violets there, and they always did super well, so I gave it a shot. Got my first orchid probably 7 or 8 years ago, and it was in bloom, of course, as they all are when you purchase them. It lost its blooms after a couple months, and then it was just green for several years until I found this window, and it turns out it liked it there. And for every orchid I've gotten, every Phalaenopsis orchid I've gotten since then, they've gone to that windowsill. It's getting a bit crowded. For my potting media, as I mentioned, there's plenty of medias out there in the market. There's things that use coconut husk or bark chips or sphagnum. The most important thing is to remember it needs to be well draining. It needs to allow for air circulation, and my preference is to use straight up long fiber, high quality sphagnum moss. And that's because we heat our house with a wood stove, so it gets very, very dry in here, and it's really easy for that to impact my houseplants in a major way. And I think that's a topic we'll save for another video in the future. But for me, sphagnum works out the best because I can give my plants a good, healthy drink and be able to touch the top of the pot of the sphagnum, and if it's damp, then I don't need to water. If it's hard and crunchy and fully dry, it's time to water, and in my home that's generally about once a week. I also like to keep them in clear pots with a lot of holes. Ideally, I will, when it's time to repot everyone, I'll probably put them into pots that I've modified so that there's even more air circulation around the sides of the pots. But for now, they're just in the nursery pots, which have drainage holes on the bottom. And I like them to be clear because orchids can give you a few different signals that they're ready to be watered. First off, their roots will get really silvery in color. And if you see that, then it's time to water them. This is more important if you're using something like orchid bark where you can't tactily feel if they're super dry. And then I just put them in a cover pot so it looks nicer. You'll see I have them in all sorts of weird little things. But what's most important is that you can take them out of the decorative pot and be able to really give them a good, healthy drink. Now, my source water is not high in TDS, but it has a lot of nutrient content because I do have a well. Because of this, I can just use my tap water to water my orchids, and I never have any problem. If you had profoundly hard water, some of the salts may be a problem over time, so you may want to flush them each month with some RO water, distilled water, or captured rainwater. Now, I don't generally use a commercial fertilizer on my orchids. I have about 60 aquariums in my basement, so about every 4 to 6 weeks I will give them a soak in used aquarium water, which doesn't have any chemicals, it doesn't have any fertilizers, but it does have all the nitrates and things that occur naturally from the aquariums housing fish. And it's worked out pretty well for me long term. Now, my orchids do bloom every January, and the blooms last about 3 to 6 months. You can cut the flowers if you want. I know that there's rumors on the internet that if you cut the flowers, the plant will die. That's just simply not true. I prefer to leave them in situ so that I can enjoy them for the entire time because my orchids give me great joy. One thing to consider is if you have them in a window or a shelf or whatever where they are getting too much light, you'll notice that the leaves start to yellow, and you can actually see this on my oldest phal. It's the one that is in the back of the window, and it's just slightly too much light. So what I should really be doing is rotating them through the windowsill in order for them to have equal lighting. Now, if the leaves are super, super dark emerald green, it means they're not getting enough light. They should be a nice, rich, bright, middle green, if you will. Now, in order to trigger a flower spike, these guys do need sort of a disruption of temperature. They need things to get cool. I get this naturally in my windowsill from them being so close to the glass. And, you know, they need like, I think it's like a 15-degree drop or so in order for them to be triggered to throw a flower spike. Now, if you live in a temperate climate like I do, I could move all of these out onto my deck, which has filtered sunlight, and just let them live out their best orchid life on my deck all summer. The only reason I don't do that is because I'm concerned about them getting pests. And on the note of pests, if you're going to be buying orchids from a big box store or something like that, it's always a good idea to give them a really thorough look over to check for any bugs, really look at the media that they are potted in, and if possible, quarantine them before adding to your collection. Quarantine is always a good idea with any new plant, animal, critter, whatever, because safety first, and it saves you a lot of headaches in the long run. Anyway, that's my experience with orchids. I have lots of different species. Today we were just talking about the one that I think is the best beginner orchid. They're beautiful. They come in a huge range of colors and patterns. There's small phals, there's giant phals, and I really think that if you pay attention to a few key details, they can be extremely rewarding and beautiful and last for years and years and years. As always, thank you guys for your continued support.